So we're really excited to have great speakers today. With me here is Lauren. He's a master engineer. He's worked in companies like NASA, Lockheed Martin, and was part of Singularity University. He is currently doing his doctoral student at studies at Oxford, where he's doing a project about Mars on Earth. And he studied design engineering at Stanford. He's also a serial entrepreneur. He co-founded Terra Recovery and BioCarbon Engineering. And as a fun fact, he was a blackjack dealer at Harrah's. Matt over here is also a strategy extraordinaire. He worked at KPMG, is that how I say it?
Capgemini.
Capgemini. And Deloitte. He did his MBA at Cambridge.
Well, yeah, similar.
Yeah. He is the CEO and founder of Parity, which is a startup that helps people access fair credit rates. And he got lost in the jungle once, but he can tell you the story later. And then Stuart, he is a startup and scale-up advisor. He has coached and mentored more than a dozen accelerators and incubators in London, Oxford, Manchester, and Edinburgh. He is a non-executive director of more than 30 companies, and in his spare time, he likes to blog about new music and casually runs a nano brewery. Mm-hmm. Cool. So our topic today is scaling a business. What does it take? And I broke out the questions into two sections. So the first part we'll talk about when is it right to scale a business, and in the second part we'll talk about once you've decided that you should scale, like how do you go about doing that, and what are the best ways to do that. So my first question for you and whoever wants to take it is, in your experience, how do you know when you're ready to scale?
I can start. So I may as well give a bit of background to Parity so it kind of contextualizes some of it. So Parity is a mobile platform to help improve people's financial lives. It connects to your bank accounts, credit cards, savings accounts, gives you one view of where you stand, and then it services financial products on your journey. So if you're falling short, then we help support the shortfall, or if you can save, then we help move that into savings. So we're 18 months old now. We were very much, or we kind of still are, a seed business in many ways. So we raised just under $500,000 from VCs last year. And it's a really interesting time for us because we've gone from the classic startup questions of what is product market fit? Does anybody actually really want your product? How can you get it out to market? Can you kind of get customer acquisition costs that are all sensible? So for the first year and a half of the business, that was absolutely the key focus of the question. Is this something people really want? And is this something that you can get into people's hands, essentially? Well, now, so we're raising another big round at the moment. Now it is about scale up. So, and the questions are very, very different. It's not like, is this a neat idea? Is there a demand there? It is, can you get the unit economics to really scale? So it's pretty easy to go and get someone for a couple of quid, but when you're getting hundreds of thousands of people through the platform on a monthly basis, can you keep the unit economics at the right pace? So that's the big key thing for me. Going through those VC conversations, going through like the life stage of the business, we've hit a point now where absolute certainty that people love the product. Now it's like, can this thing really work at scale? And I suppose that's the time that we realize that we're ready to scale up in many ways, and need to prove those additional data points.
But what was that breaking point? Like, how was it 100,000 users? Like, how did you know that was?
We've hit 100,000 users. It's kind of a bit of an arbitrary number in many ways. So kind of the key thing for us really is about 50% of our users come organically. So there is clearly a demand there. That's not just us pushing a product on people. We're getting great reviews. The market's been very receptive. I don't think there's a formula. There's definitely not a recipe of once you've ticked the following 10 boxes, then you're ready to scale up. It's just, is there clearly a real demand for this? And then once you've really cracked that, then that's the point at which you need to really hit the gas and start to kind of take it as big as it can be.
Cool. And Stuart, you've advised many companies in terms of scaling. Like, what is your view on when is it right to do that?
There's a couple of things that I use as a guide. So firstly, 30 years ago, there was a Harvard report called The 5 Stages of Business Growth, Small Business Growth. And roughly speaking, the first 3 stages were exist. So if you're an entrepreneur, you create something, you make it exist, then you've got to survive through the early days, then you stabilize. When you reach that stabilization point, you make a decision do I risk the stability to grow bigger? And quite often that decision is driven by the investors in the business and their expectations. But there's another thing that I think is an indicator of its time to scale. When you start a business, you typically build a relatively flat structure with people managing diverse responsibilities but no specific responsibilities. When a business grows to the point where you feel like you need to bring in a new structure with specific people in specific roles, you are getting ready for scaling, whether you know it or not. You can't scale without that. When you feel that you need it, you are ready to scale, in my opinion.
Well, and thank you for the great introduction. And it always surprises me when things come out and I say, did I really put that out on the internet?
Stalked you a little.
Hey, whoa, there we go. I thought I locked that. So we have a very different company. So BioCarbon Engineering is a ecosystem restoration company. We are building drones that will plant 1 billion trees a year. So the way it works is we use big data. So we take satellite and remote sensing data, and we crunch as much information as we can about the information about the local environment, and we use that to match tree species to the right location to plant. Then with that precision planting pattern, we use that to drive our planting drones. The drones fly about 2 meters off the ground. We have little seed pods that have a germinated seed and nutrients, and we use pressurized air to fire those into the ground at the precise locations. 2 operators would be operating multiple drones simultaneously at 10 times the rate of typical hand planting, about 15% the cost. So really scalable, 150 teams to get us 1 billion trees a year. And funny enough, on that scaling side, everybody says, wow, we love the big number. 1 billion is a good number. It really catches the globe's attention. But then all the real ecosystem folks say, wow, you're just not ambitious enough. And I'm like, oh, God, really? Can you do 100 billion a year? And I'm like, geez, 1 billion's already tough. So it's hitting the market in the right way. And I think Phil's talk this morning was really great, where he's talking about all those different technologies coming together at the right point that are good enough. And then we're taking the best of those technologies and we're combining those to be able to enable us to be able to do this whole thing. We're not looking at user adoption at the front end as the definition of whether it's the right time to scale. It's all about one thing, getting trees to grow. So we have to get all of these technologies in place and demonstrate to the client base that we can do this. Because the first thing they ask is they say, wow, that's a great idea. Can you show me one flying? I'll get right back to you on that. And so we get one built, we have it flying, we're actually showing that we can do this, and they say, wow, that's really amazing. Now can you show me a tree growing? And so that's the stage that we've just completed. We've gotten field trials where we have several species that are growing effectively, and now we're at that stage where we can start to bundle up a commercial offering and really start to get out in the market. And I think that's a key difference between a lot of the app-driven technologies where adoption and getting clients into the user database is really, really important, where we actually have to show the technology's doing what it needs to do.
Cool. And then as you're deciding, okay, you've decided you're going to scale, like what are some of the questions that you should answer before going through with moving forward?
Is it scalable? So we did the classic kind of startup thing of build something that was completely unscalable, because right at the beginning, because you want to get the quickest proof points possible. You want to get out, you want to build something, you want to learn, all the classic kind of startup methodologies that you read. So that's exactly what we did. Back in the early days, we built the simplest possible thing we could, completely bootstrapped. This is before we even raised any seed funding. And it proved those initial hypotheses, but it wasn't going to scale. I mean, everything was very, very, very manual. Customer service was coming directly on a one-to-one basis. So, and if that grows linearly, you're in all sorts of trouble. So that was the key thing for us, really, getting all the right components in place to build something that actually could really, really pop. So as soon as we closed our seed round and proved all of those original proof points, we completely rebuilt the product. So we spent 3 or 4 months, almost a year after building the original product, rebuilding it from scratch and building something that was absolutely scalable, something that could kind of cross boundaries, something that didn't need, so without getting into too much detail, we analyze we're a regulated credit bureau. underneath the hood so that we can service products. But we essentially analyze all the transactional data to really understand the financial standing that somebody's in. So to begin with, we had manual tagging. We had Tesco. Well, that is somebody in our team had determined that that's a supermarket, and Costa Coffee, whatever it may be, that is a coffee shop. That's completely unscalable. So, all of a sudden you're then having to completely shift everything on its head to say, okay, well now we're actually doing everything automated. We're using machine learning. We're using all of these types of things to make sure that it kind of crosses boundaries. So that was the key thing for us, really, making sure that you had a technology that could scale, that input isn't linear to output, and that it could really pop.
So I think you've got to ask yourself the question, if we started in another country, if we were to take our business, start an operation, start in that country with people who've never worked in the business before, so they've not got the historic learning, could we make that work? And if you can't make that work, why can't we make that work? We don't have the systems in place, we don't have the understanding, we don't know the market, we don't have the finance. Scaling quite often involves finance. So ask yourself that. Scaling is different things to different people. For some people it's revenue, for some people it's users. If you're in pharma, scaling is something completely different to if you're in an app business. So what would it take to do that quantum leap? I want to go from 1 times the size to 10 times the size. What does that really take? And will it all fall apart, or am I ready? Have I built the plan? So to me, there's a thing that comes before scaling, which is planning for the scale. And to my mind, for all companies, the focus has got to be your customers. If you had 10 times the customers, could you keep them happy? Would they be happy customers? Could you service them and support them and train them, deliver to them, answer their questions? Can you do that? If you're a B2C app, that's a different proposition to if you're mission critical cybersecurity or if you're a piece of biomedical equipment. So can you keep your customers happy if you grew 5 times, 10 times as big?
I mean, from our technology perspective, if our original goal was to hit 1 billion trees a year, we had to think in which technologies are scalable, and that was just the underlying principle of everything that we've done from the very beginning.
Cool. And then what do you think is the most, a scaling challenge that most people underestimate?
Hiring.
Yeah.
It's our biggest pain. So you have the founding team, the original employees, everybody's there for more than money. You've got to be a lunatic, to be perfectly honest, to join an early stage, like the earliest stage business, because it is going to fail. You are going to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be uncertain. There's all the components of what actually, if you were to write a job spec, you'd never really want. So all those people are there for something much more. They're bound by the mission. I mean, particularly in our business, we've got a really big mission of we want to essentially, finance is incredibly stressful. The banks haven't got your back, and actually we want to build a business that is on the consumer side, that is there to help people improve rather than profit on decline. And as soon as you have something as tangible and as important, well, we certainly think it's important as that, you can attract people very early on to that, and they are there for that specific reason, and they live and they breathe it. Then when you start to scale, it's absolutely fascinating, because all of a sudden lots of traditional components come in. So, like salary is an important thing. So job title. So a funny anecdote, I probably shouldn't even kind of say this, but we almost found this perfect hire one day. We'd gone through tons and tons and tons of different interviews with her, thought it was absolutely brilliant. And then it came to the crux, we'd agreed salary, and then she said, can I have a slightly more senior job title? And you think, alarm bells. Alarm bells all of a sudden, that actually early stage business, someone who's hung up about the fact that they want something else in their job title, maybe not the right person. But I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges, that you have to go from a really, really small close-knit group of friends, essentially, through to putting in all the right structures to have all the right management, performance reviews and all this type of stuff. So it's our biggest challenge.
It's 3 C's. The 3 C's catch you out: culture, communication and cash. And the culture thing, my first startup, software business, there was this shocking moment where I suddenly realized that someone in my office that I'd employed and given a job in my precious company didn't give a stuff about the company. And it was like a slap in the face. How dare you not share my passion for my company? And suddenly this realization that this person was there for the salary. That's what they were there for. They didn't care about the journey. If the company failed, they'd go somewhere else. They would do what they were asked to do and no more. And so there's part of me thinking we've hired the wrong person. But actually, in the early years, for about the first 5 years, we doubled the headcount every single year. And suddenly you realize that 50% of the people in your company have been there less than a year. And that you're rapidly diluting the culture in the company. And so effective communication is key. And when we opened a second office in America, someone once described, so I was in the DC office for a while, which was a satellite of the Dallas office, which was a satellite of the London office. And someone said to me, "Who are you?" I phoned into London. I said, "It's Stuart from Washington." "Oh yeah, the branch office of the branch office." And it's like, yeah, but you know, we're all part of the same team, right? "Oh yeah, what are you up to today," sort of thing. "I don't care," basically was the answer. So communication was very key. Being focused on the culture of the business was key. But of course, cash. If you scale without the cash and you run out of money, that's the risk you take from taking something that was a stable platform to make it bigger. You must ensure you can cope with the stress, and cash flow kills companies.
So how do you maintain like communication and culture as you're growing?
I think you need to decide specifically what your values are and what kind of culture you want. You know, when you start your first company, you probably don't know, so you choose things around your own values. When you've done a few, you start to realize that there are ways that you can encourage bonding between teams of people in disparate areas of the company that have massive payback. And frankly, for us in the first company, it was all around events. It was shared experiences. And more than cash, people like cash, but more than cash, those shared experiences of doing something together where the traditional boundaries of the company fall apart, where the shipping department's together with the software developers, is together with the finance people, and frankly, they're all getting wet and having a party. Those are the things that bond people together and develop that understanding, rather than the traditional thing of sales being on the back of production, or production telling sales they're behind target. That adversarial kind of culture is something you want to avoid when you're in a high growth situation.
Yeah, we're not there yet. And listening to these guys, I'm going, oh man, geez, we're looking so forward to those phases. But the overall vision that we have is, global scale ecosystem restoration, full stop. That is our mission and that is our objective, which is a really clear message to finding people in the early phases. But when we get to next year, when we're going to have to double the number of people on staff, it becomes exceedingly difficult to keep bringing on people who still really fundamentally believe in that and have the skill sets that you need to really drive the business forward. So we're going to have a lot of fun doing that, I think. And then when we get to the point where we have 150 operational field teams planting 1 billion trees a year, well, you know what? They've got quotas they're going to have to make, and it's going to be quota driven and less about the vision at that point. So it's a really good question. How do you put together a vision and a culture for your company that, especially when you have a socially driven mission like ours, and maintain that throughout the entire company? I think it's going to be a big challenge. So growth is going to be a challenge. How do you find really good employees? And I think the early stage where we're at right now, we're asking people to come on and take a risk on us, especially when we're looking at the technicians and the engineers, where there's Amazon and Facebook and Google, who all have top-notch drone programs that they're pulling together, not to mention Parrot and DJI and a number of the others around the world who are all paying big salaries. They have stable companies, and you can go work for them and have a great job and a pretty decent salary and working on fun stuff, and it's pretty stable. We're asking people to say, well, come in and work for us. We can't pay you as much, and we might not be here next year. But please, come and work for us. That's awesome. But it's that big picture vision that we can sell now. Later on, it'll be a little harder. I think the other difficulty that we're going to face is that when we really start into our scaling phase in planting trees is customer acquisition, getting customers to believe in our technology and adopt that technology at the scale of 1 billion trees a year. And I think that will be a major challenge. Once we have the technology working, which we're right at that point, it's easy to build new units and additional units and train engineers and train all the right people to help us do that. But customer acquisition at that point will be, I think, our biggest challenge. I don't think that's unreasonable.
And then what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen companies do or that you think you've done in scaling?
Scaling too early, I know that it's a constant pressure. So, I mean, being a platform, platforms need scale. I mean, we do not survive if we are subscale. If we float along at 100,000, 150,000, the economics of our business can never work. And similarly, the appetite and requirements for our investors, it's never going to work. I mean, we have institutional money in from the start, so we need to deliver a 10x, 20x return on these things. And equally, we want to build the biggest business we can possibly build in the world. But you see so many businesses that are on this path, they've raised a ton of money, they've got this huge vision, and they go hell for leather before the fundamentals are proven. And customer acquisition cost, I think, particularly for a mobile business, is the thing that will kill you. So, the equation that is in everybody's mind in our business is we make sure that the lifetime value absolutely exceeds the customer acquisition costs. And for so many businesses, there's like zero evidence of the lifetime value. I mean, we're at that stage where we're just proving lifetime value. So we're having to really, really keep customer acquisition costs really low. But you have so many of these businesses that are plowing 10, 20, 50 pound per customer into it on the kind of vague hope that one day they might monetize. And then it's a question of how nervous, how deep you can dig and hope that you come out the other side. But seen so many times. I mean, like power technologies. Being in fintech, it's kind of the one that comes to mind of one of the darlings of the UK, and then it's bam, it's gone. And that was exactly the same. They dug so deep on customer acquisition, and still hadn't really got a strategy that clearly worked. But to get to scale, if you're in those types of businesses, scale is so important that they just dug far, far, far too deep without actually any revenue hardly on the other side of it. So.
Well, the amazing thing about power is that Dan Wagner's done the same thing twice before with two other companies and still managed to go out and raise tens of millions of dollars of funding for a strategy that was fundamentally the same as the two previous businesses that went to the wall. And so, you've got to say the guy's a great salesman, a really good salesman. But none of those companies really delivered for their shareholders. I think that, that thing about running out of cash is very important. I think the other thing is standing still without realizing you're standing still. So you can be deceived when your business is growing, when your revenues are growing, your customer base is growing, you've got more people, you've got more operations, you think you're growing, you're standing still. And you're standing still because you're not keeping an eye on the market. You're not looking for your competition. You're not looking for changes in the market. You're not paying attention to what's going on. And my first startup software business, that was happening to us and we didn't actually realize it. So we were growing, our investors were really happy, we were expanding globally. I spent 2 years building a Japanese operation, did the biggest deal we'd ever done in Japan, but we sold the company that year for quite a lot less than we would have sold it a couple of years previously, because outside people realized that the market has shifted, that we had not stayed as current as we could have done. And so when we sold the business, we did okay out of it, we were happy, but we could have done a lot better if we'd either adapted to what was going on and about to happen to us, or if we'd sold a lot sooner and let somebody else worry about it. The cash flow thing's interesting. I worked with an engineering company, so not many people talk about good old-fashioned British engineering. I went to see them at the behest of the chairman because the bank had put them in special situations. And when the bank does that, they say, you're at risk. And I went to see the CEO, and he said, I don't understand it. We grew sales by 38% last year. We're a great business. And they were a great business on their P&L. The bit that he overlooked was that they were selling bits of kit that cost £300,000 to make, £600,000 to sell, and took 6 months to build, and they took no customer deposits. So they financed that entire period. So of course growing the business by 38% nearly killed them. But the CEO came from an engineering background, very, very strong on what his customers wanted, but actually didn't have a grasp of the finances.
Yeah, see, these are great hands. I love that. Yeah, I think there are a couple of points that I would add to that, which is, I think you should be real clear about where you're going to scale and the cost of where you're going to scale. So everybody wants to move to Silicon Valley if you're a startup because you think you're going to get better valuations and you think you're going to get better rounds, especially with A rounds and beyond. But the reality is that the cost of doing business in Silicon Valley is significant. Your cost of engineers, your cost of staff, your actual cost of your rent is huge. So you actually can take a look at building businesses successfully in the European theater at a lot lower cost. Now you're going to get lower rounds, but consequently it costs you a lot less to do the business here as well. So think smartly about where you want to base your business and why. And going to the US isn't always the best option, especially if your customer base is going to be European or outside of the United States.
I think technical talent's really interesting. This is a very specific pain point that we have, but being a mobile app, some of the most expensive technical talent you can get is an iOS developer, because everybody needs an app. Whoever you are, however big your company, everybody needs an app. So all of a sudden you've got this actually a relatively small talent pool in the UK. Who it's a really nascent sector, it's nowhere near as big as it is in the US, who can command astounding day rates. I mean, some of the day rates that we've been, when we've been kind of pulling in additional resource to help people. I mean, some of the expectations about, I don't get out of bed if it's not 800 a day. It's terrifying. And we had this one incredible lady who was wonderful. She was absolutely brilliant. And she said, I've just got one issue there. And it's like, well, okay, why is that? She said, I don't take any jobs which is more than a 15 walk from my house. Like, this is ridiculous. When you've got like a supply and demand mismatch like that. So I agree. I mean, the UK is cost is a hell of a lot lower than Silicon Valley. And, we're increasingly looking to Europe, actually. One of our highest developers splits his time between Barcelona and here for exactly that reason. But yeah, I mean, like, there's big riches in the US, but there's a lot of costs that come in.
If we'd taken the same round that we have for our seed round, and that was in Silicon Valley, our burn rate would be so much faster, we would not make it to our next round.
The other thing on scaling is, quite a lot of early stage companies outsource as much as possible. So they don't pay salaries, they outsource, they can turn it on and off as they need. But as you start to scale, if these are things that are mission critical that you're really dependent upon, then you are taking a big risk. And I have seen companies that are dependent on third-party suppliers, mostly in manufacturing actually, rather than in things like development, where the manufacturer has gone to the wall. And what do you do? If that was your sole manufacturer, they're offshore, all the tooling's there for making your product, and they're gone. And they're in a jurisdiction where you've got no rights, basically. So there's a huge risk in the growth by outsourcing. You've got to make a judgment call on how much you are risking the future of your business by outsourcing key components of the business.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to open it up to questions now. Happy to take any.
Yeah, I see that lunch motivation is bigger than the question motivation.
Hi, my name's Ben. I invest in startups in London. And one of the interesting things you hear, particularly Silicon Valley VCs say, is that there haven't been a slew of huge global companies coming out of Europe. And I would hate to think that we don't have the same talent here. Certainly at Oxford, you'd hope we've got a lot of highly intelligent, skilled people. But we do have to take a kind of a step back and think, why is that not happening? Why aren't we getting as many companies scaling from the European kind of countries? And what do you think that would be?
Well, it's changing, clearly. I mean, it's an undoubted fact that has historically been the case. Again, talking very specifically fintech, I mean, everybody recognises that London is the fintech hub of the world now. I mean, you have some of the biggest growth stories, the TransferWises, etc., of the world that are coming out to London. So I think it's changing, but I think supply of capital has definitely been a challenge. I mean, we simply don't have the level of VC investment that's available in Silicon Valley, but that is changing. And that is a lot of US investors now acknowledging actually that Europe has got some fantastic talent, it's got some fantastic ideas, and it is, fingers crossed, based on not happening next Thursday. We have a unified European market that actually, you can base in London, and you can tap actually as big a population as you can in the US. So I definitely think it's changing. I think there's been some amazing things. So I was a big cynic of the fintech movement at the beginning because I didn't really know what it was. I mean, I always worked in fintech before it was called fintech. But I mean, government championing, government investment, all of a sudden it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as the government starts saying, we're the fintech hub of the world, then all of a sudden everyone starts to take notice. And then a couple of our early employees had never worked in finance before. They'd worked in kind of education tech startups. And they wanted to come to fintech, which is a really strange thing for me. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we're getting better talent. Money is really, really flowing in, less so the last quarter or last half of the year. But I think like all the recipes, all the right ingredients are there for it to bloom. Berlin is becoming much bigger. Stockholm, I mean, some of the biggest companies, for God's sake, Spotify, are coming out of some of those areas. But I think it's just, it's talent. All of those things are there. It's just kind of getting the right recipe.
Well, I think you've got to differentiate between companies that look like they're valuable on paper and companies that create value. And so, I read that article recently that said the unicorn is dead, and I sort of mentally said to myself, well, you do know it's a fictional thing in the first place, don't you? Now we're all supposed to be cockroach businesses, well, a load of nonsense. So the point is that there's a lot of good UK businesses that are scaling and building revenues, employing people, paying taxes outside of the UK as much as inside the UK, in sectors that are less sexy. So digital, tech has come to mean digital. These are the ones that are getting the high profile, but there are some great pharmaceutical, med tech, life sciences, engineering, Formula One, space technology, Oxford Space Labs, PV, Oxford Solar. There's a whole bunch of technologies that have transitioned from innovation to scalable, growing, global businesses. And so I don't want a company that's got $1 billion valuation on $10 of revenue, frankly. That's great if you are an early shareholder, but those people who've got it at that value have got to work a way of selling it to some other mug for even more money, because that is that game. That game is about the perception of value and selling it on. I'm interested in businesses that genuinely create value, that they are that combination of business sense, commercialization, and innovation. And I think actually we're quite good in that space. And I'm quite happy if Silicon Valley investors say you don't have anything like we've got. It's like, great, you keep all your stuff that's overvalued that you're going to lose money on, and we'll keep all our stuff that creates revenue and jobs.
Yeah, and there's certainly lots of examples of companies that are doing quite well in the European theater. Oxford Nanopore, Natural Motion. You could throw in Skype, WhatsApp, are all products that have come out of the European theater. And then robotics, drones are the cutting edge drone technology is really becoming European based. So you've got the Lucene labs that are building all of SenseFly and the remote sensing operations. You've got Parrot drones out of France. Our investor, so I have to be transparent. I'm plugging our investor, please. Yeah. So I think there's lots of opportunities. And then I think one of the other things is a massive cultural shift in wanting to keep great companies funded in Europe. And so the Duke of York has started a program called Pitch of the Palace. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah, and so he cherry picks the best emerging companies, and then he puts them in the room and gets them to give a quick pitch to 300 of his closest friends and top UK investors. Some are through Europe and from North America as well, but the whole intent is to get them talking to each other to get the investment in those companies and keep them in Europe, as opposed to letting them go to Silicon Valley and let the high growth and the high value phase go over there. I mean, there's lots of changes, I think, over here that are going to really enable companies to be able to be developed and grow within Europe.
I will say though, my first startup, I was based in Silicon Valley in a time, I was a software business where everybody invested in hardware. And you can't help but think that if we built that software business 10 years later, regardless of what we did, we'd have had money pouring into the business for no good reason other than the fact that we were a software business based in Silicon Valley. So I kind of regret that bit, personally, as an early shareholder in the business.
esoftware.com, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Question here.
Hi. So in order to scale, how important digital marketing is, and how much should be wise to invest in terms, I don't know, of percentage of revenue or any other metric?
What kind of business?
Tech business.
It's the equation that I talked about at the beginning. So there is no, there's no optimal percentage based on kind of one size fits all. It is simply what is the lifetime value of your customer. Again, our business, it doesn't work in lots of others. But if you're a platform business that you're trying to keep and retain customers, how long are they going to stay with you for? How much money can you make from them during that time? And therefore, when you back that equation out, how much can it cost to pay to acquire them? And it is as simple as that. So yeah, I mean that's the foundations of any business. But again, kind of, I think one of the key things really, and we've seen it certainly amongst investors, and it's so important for us, is that you can't build a business that is purely based on just throwing cash down the top of that funnel. Even if academically there is this wonderful financial model which says we're going to make £20 a year ARPU and we're going to pay £10 to get them and they're going to stay for 10 years, and it's wonderfully gross margin positive. You've got to have something that is a lot more than that. And that's one of the intangible things which is actually quite hard. Like, how do you measure forecast virality, for instance? How do you forecast word of mouth and all this type of stuff? So that's one of the harder ones. But yeah, basically.
But the beauty is now, if you go back when we started 30 years ago, we had to do print advertising. Okay. That's how we spread. When I started my first startup, mobile phones didn't exist. For that matter, no one used email either. We thought fax was cutting-edge technology. So times have changed. You can try things, turn them on and off fairly rapidly now to work out the most effective way. So it's got to be cost-effective, but what creates the most new users for you in terms of your marketing? And what can we try? We can try 10 different things, give them a go, and see what generates the most impact for us. So that is a great luxury if you're that type of business. If you're a cybersecurity business with 50 customers in the world, max, you're not going to do social media marketing. So it does depend on the type of business. I've got one of those, that's why I happen to mention that. All our new client acquisition comes through really, really old-fashioned hard sales work, spending 6 months to get to the right person in the right company for that 1 hour opportunity to close them. They're not going to read our tweets. But for other businesses, you can go turn those things on and off and try what you do. If I had £1 for every business that came to me and said, I'm raising £2,200,000. I say, okay, what's the 200,000 for? Oh, that's for hiring, product development, premises, facility, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, well, what's the 2 million for? Oh, that's marketing. Yeah, we're just going to throw it at the marketing and make it all stick. A, they're not going to get the money, and B, it actually doesn't work. So we'd like to see a bit more preparation than that.
But it's just rapid test and learn. So I mean I worked for a startup before that, and we did actually do some print advertising, which kind of sounds crazy for a mobile app business. So we had big, huge page ads at the back of the Metro newspaper, free newspaper in London, right next to the sports section, which was bang on for our user base. Got about 10 downloads a day, but we had to learn that. We had to learn that actually, every single marketing message that you want to push into the market, every single channel, all of these types of things, where does it fit into the conversation that you're having with a user? Be it brand building at the top. Am I aware, even if I don't want to buy, am I aware of this brand? am I aware then of what they actually do? And then when I'm actually at a point where I want to purchase, or where I'm at the point where I want to download or use something, are you there at that specific moment to close that? So it's just massive test and learn. But fortunately, digital marketing is amazing because you can throw £1,000 through something, highly analyze it, understand whether it works, whether it doesn't, and kill it and optimize and change. So we have probably about 100 different variants of adverts running through Facebook and Instagram at any one time. We're chopping and changing the creative, we're chopping and changing the slight different words that we use on any of these different types of things. If it doesn't work, kill it. There's no like hanging on to stuff. So.
Yeah, we have a very different experience, to be honest with you. Our vision is so big and has really captured the world's attention. I mean, we've fundamentally changed the conversation on how do you go about global scale ecosystem restoration. And as a result of that, if you do a search just on our basic name, you'll get at least 20,000 hits on Google. Videos on us are more than 1 million. We have articles translated into at least more than 20 languages that we know of. I mean, we've really changed and captured the attention of the world. So we have plenty of people calling us up on a daily basis and saying, how can I buy one? Can you come and can you plant? So our goal and objective is making things grow, and that's where we're very careful about making sure that we get that part right, because if we get the growing part right, then scaling after that becomes a whole lot easier. It's always a challenge. Customer acquisition is not going to be an easy thing. It's easy for people to call us up and say, yeah, we want you to come, and say, well, how much are you willing to pay? So there's always going to be that battle there. But for us, we have a real different experience, I think, than a lot of other companies have to go through in terms of customer acquisition and marketing and market share development.
You've got to get
We're
a
really
business
fortunate.
that plants trees. Everyone should have a business that plants trees. Right?
We're really fortunate. Really fortunate. I can't express that enough. We
It's
have
the ultimate growth business.
Yeah. So yeah, my business partner who started this with me, he's like going, "This isn't how it's supposed to work." So, yeah.
Other questions?
Back there.
Thank you. I'm Isabella Bunn. I was wondering about geopolitics and other kinds of external risks. You hinted at Brexit, but I'm really interested to hear about political changes, regulatory changes, commodity pricing changes that really impact your plans. And how do you become aware of those in time, and how do you adjust what your strategy is based on those risks?
Yeah, we in particular are really driven by exactly all of those questions. Carbon markets is a really great example. So that is one of our markets, but to be honest with you, we don't rely on that as a revenue stream. We say that is a potential revenue stream, but geez, geopolitics change on a daily basis, and it really depends on who's been elected. So we can recognize that as a potential market, but we can't rely on that one. Where we do take a look at is the customers who have trees as a commodity, so pulp, paper, lumber. Those are obvious customers. Any company that has a regulatory requirement to restore afterwards, so that's mostly the extractive industries like mining. So they're looking for good options that help them satisfy that requirement that is cheaper than the current standard. And then after that, the 80% of the global market is ecosystem restoration. And right now, the geopolitics are pushing towards not just the recognition that we need to do something about rebuilding these forests, they're actually putting money behind it. So we're hitting exactly the right market at the right time with a technology that will provide a new tool for them to be able to do that job cheaper, more efficiently at larger scale. And then I think the other part to it is regulatory on whether or not we can actually fly drones, and that's a changing market. So we have to pay real careful attention to that, but we're having Parrot in particular as our investor and collaborator helps us do all sorts of things on that. I mean, they're a big advocate in global use of drones. They're in there, and so they're paying attention to that. So they've got the resources and the political clout to protect us at times. So finding a good investor who has a good investor who just doesn't have money, who recognizes your vision and has things to bring to the table is really important. I mean, certainly for some of the startup companies, you're desperate for that early cash and you're going to take whatever you can get. And I understand that. But for us, we were really careful about who that first client was going to be, and we didn't necessarily need the money from Parrot so much. We could bootstrap it longer. The money coming in makes them a great investor partner, and it also allows us to accelerate our development, but we didn't necessarily have to take it, so we were very careful about who that was going to be.
I think, the cybersecurity business I mentioned is, to a certain extent, dependent upon attitudes to personal data and generally to cybersecurity and the impact on an economy, a national economy. And so you've got to be very conscious of the fact that regulation can change with a change of regime. And so if you build a business that's based on, let's say, a particular regulation in respect to personal data, be aware of the fact that that can be pulled out from under you at any time, and be prepared for that. Have a contingency plan for what are you going to do if that happens. And likewise, how can we prevent that happening? There's a big enough economy where we're dependent on a regulatory environment. Is it worth investing in lobbyists to actually make sure that that stays the way it is, because it's in our commercial interest to do so? It's not like we don't read about this in the press every single day in the context of our economy here in the UK. But also things like opening up of trade is also something to plan for. So again, first business we opened in South Africa and in India at a time where foreign ownership of companies was heavily restricted. Those regulations changed. We'd already built customer base and partnerships in country ready for a change in regulation. We did not know when it was going to happen. We didn't know 6 months before it happened, but when it did happen, we were there ready for it, and we took maximum advantage. I opened an office in what was Czechoslovakia 1 month after the Velvet Revolution. We opened an office there, formed a partnership there. The opportunities for revenue were slight, but within 2 years, that was our 4th biggest revenue generating country on the mainland, outside of our home base in the UK. So, having the foresight to plan for something without relying on it, it's a difficult thing to pull off. After the fact, I can tell you that was all down to brilliant planning, but it wasn't. There was a degree of luck involved.
So when do you ignore regulation? Because you have companies like Uber that have gone into markets without really having the regulatory environment for that, but have still continued to scale regardless. And especially for a fintech company, when is that critical?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in fintech, you're in regulation. I mean, it's one of the, I think, the naiveties that a lot of people have, is that you can skirt around the edge. It's management 101, knowing the broader environment. So, thinking about ourselves as an example, so we actually got our FCA regulatory license last Friday, and it had taken 12 months to get through. I mean, that is a phenomenally long process to even get approved into the sector.
That's fast.
Well,
My first business took 18.
It's
painful.
It's terrifying. There was a startup when you basically got to submit a business plan and then say, we're not going to change. We were going to be exactly the same in 12 months' time when you want to approve us. But it's huge, So I kind of alluded to Brexit kind of tongue-in-cheek earlier on, but for our business, there was a big regulatory change at a European level that has it has such an impact on the whole, on our business, but on the whole of retail banking. So there was a regulatory piece of legislation called PSD2, which was passed, that basically said that from 2017, the banks will be mandated to provide open APIs to players such as ourselves. So at the moment, it's very difficult. We have to connect to Santander and NatWest and Barclays separately, and it's very difficult and complex, which is kind of why it's quite hard to get into what we're doing. But in 2017, the bank must provide open APIs. So this has such a big impact. So for us, it's kind of fulfilling what we think is which is the answer, that the bank of the future isn't a bank at all. The banks become the utilities, and we play over the top. So this is driven at a European level. It's going to be mandated into local law within 2 years, and then Thursday. We're raising money at the moment. And I met an investor yesterday. He said, "Love the business, fantastic. Probably going to come in. I'll tell you on Thursday." I mean, that is unbelievable, really.
So then, do you pack up and head to mainland Europe on Friday?
Well, I mean, it's one of the debates that we had. So I started the conversation going, "Oh my God, I can't believe what's going on at the moment." Then at the end of it, I was like, no worries whatsoever. It's going to be absolutely fine. But I mean, you have to plan for all those types of things. So there is a very, very real risk that we will have to relocate outside of the UK. if that happens, because if we leave the UK and if that European legislation therefore isn't enacted into local law, which it will be anyway, because the UK regulator's jumping on it. But there is a very real risk, and you have to always be thinking about and planning those types of things.
I think there's a question there.
Hello. I was curious to know how you make the big decisions when you're scaling your business. I imagine the right path is always obvious, and there might be debates among your leadership teams or with advisors, and kind of what is the dynamics of choosing, where to go next or whatever that big decision is.
Well, we have our early product market entry. So our next phase from where we're at is doing a larger set of field trials with a collaborator client in their location of choice. And we're carefully selecting where that location is to be because we want positive results on the other side. So everything that we do is geared towards that proof point. And then we know what proof points that we need beyond that for about the next 12 to 18 months beyond that. And those are start to be driven towards customer acquisition so that we can get to our next raise round. And so we use that to drive our decisions, everything from hiring to strategy for where we're going to go for each of these proof points.
I think you're going to develop a range of options. So you're going to ask yourself, why are we scaling now? Why do we want to scale now? How are we going to scale now? What are our options for scaling? And you're then going to pull together a range of options and narrow them down and probably ask as many people as possible in your ecosystem to gain insight, to help you make decisions on prioritization. It is, I think, in my opinion, very rare that you have one option for scaling and a very clear time to do it. Generally speaking, it's a lot fuzzier than that. I'm a board advisor to 6 companies at the moment. Some of them, the tech companies, their view of scaling is move to America. I've moved to America. I've taken a business to America. For all of those that haven't done it before, that are sitting there saying, we'll just start an operation, hire a really good sales guy and sell the hell out of America. It's 5 times bigger, so we'll make 5 times the money. That ain't true. That ain't going to happen. But I'm also on the board of a tea business that makes tea. And scaling for them, America's not an option. Scaling for them is getting into bigger retailers. And the demands of a huge retailer versus a small niche retailer are fairly scary to them. The quality, consistency, the logistics, the way in which the finance works, all of these things that the company's got to be prepared for. And so the challenges of that business are very different to the software businesses. And in all cases, if I'm a board advisor, I would expect to be working with the operational team to discuss these things from the moment I come on board. When are we going to scale this business, and in what ways are we going to scale this business, and what are the implications of that for us in terms of our resource and the capabilities? So I don't think it's a black and white decision. It's something that you will come to probably a set of options and then narrow it down to prioritization.
I think the interesting thing we've learned is the ruthless focus of single purpose that you need as well. So like everything, we always talk about being consumer-led. We build this with you, not for you, all this type of stuff. So we have a community forum, for instance, where we have a group that we cheesily call the super users who've been invited, and they can contribute ideas, and they get involved, and they see early screenshots, and they test beta versions of the app, all this type of stuff. So we actively say, like, what do you want? What do you need? What is it that could make this amazing? And you get a spectrum of feedback like this, and everybody's view is as important. And it's fantastic as like the top of the funnel of the ideas and the focus of the business. But then it's about boiling and condensing that down to not what's quite nice or what could be like slightly better. It is like, what is that ruthless single focus? Like, what is that one point that will make this thing explode? And that's the team. That is your interpretation of all of that, and that's strategy in a startup as opposed to a classic 2x2 from a management consultant trying to expand into a new market.
Well, I think we're getting close to time anyway. Thank you so much for joining us. And Matt, I hope you stay post-Brexit. Thank you, guys.